Hi, I'm Annette Bramley. I'm the director of the N8 Research Partnership. The N8's the Strategic Research Alliance of the 8 most research-intensive universities across the north of England.
Hi, I'm Claire Wilson. I'm a postdoc at the University of Liverpool, and I'm also co-chair of the Research Staff Association at Liverpool.
Hi, I'm Joan Chang. I'm a postdoc research associate at the University of Manchester.
Hi, I'm Alex James. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Liverpool in materials chemistry, and like Claire, a co-chair of the RSA. And you're listening to the National PostDoc Conference special for the Academy's Development Practice podcast.
Hello, in this National PostDoc Conference special, we met up with Dr. Annette Bramley, Dr. Claire Wilson and Dr. Joan Chang. We chat with them about being stronger together, a key theme of the National PostDoc Conference hosted by the University of Liverpool, taking place in September 2021. We hope you enjoy. Annette, Claire and Joan, we are really pleased to be speaking with you today for this National PostDoc Conference special. We're delighted to talk to you about how to build stronger connections, which is a theme for the big conference hosted by the University of Liverpool, taking place in September 2021. But before we get started, and we do this on all of our podcasts, we like to get to know our guests a little bit more. So if you can each give us a little bit about your background and how you have arrived at the position that you're in today. And I'll start with Annette, please.
Thanks, Matt. It's really exciting. Thanks for inviting us to take part in this podcast. So I started out as a undergraduate in material science, and following that I did a PhD and a postdoc in materials, particularly for superconductor applications. So that was the background of my science career. But after about 18 months of postdoc, I decided that an academic career wasn't for me. So I jumped to the other side of the fence and joined the Engineering Physical Sciences Research Council as a portfolio manager. And I stayed with EPSRC for about 20 years, working my way up the Quango ladder, I guess you'd say. And then I joined the N8 in the beginning of 2018. And I guess along the way I learned a lot about collaborations, working across disciplines, and it's absolutely a passion of mine.
Brilliant, thanks, Annette. Alex, I'm going to come to you next because obviously you're our co-host today, or a special guest co-host. Give us a little bit about your background, if you can, Alex.
Yeah, okay, cool. So very excited to be helping you co-host this episode of the podcast. So I completed my MChem degree in chemistry at the University of Hull from 2012 to 2016. I then started a PhD at the University of Sheffield, actually also in material science as well, a little bit like you, Annette. So I was working on porous materials for applications of CO2 capture and storage. So I did a three-year PhD with Dr. Rob Dawson in Sheffield, and came to the end of that in 2020 in October. Is when I handed in. I got a postdoc at the University of Liverpool then, so started that in January of 2020, so one of the worst times to start a postdoc and move to a new city. But started that in January 2020. It's a 3-year postdoctoral position at the University of Liverpool with Andy Cooper, working again on different types of porous materials for challenging gas separations in industry. In addition to the research that I do, I'm also co-chair of the RSA, which is helping to organise the MPDC conference. And we're a research community that kind of tries to bridge the discussion between postdocs and higher senior members of the university and kind of raises issues on behalf of postdocs.
Brilliant, nice plug. That must have been a really difficult time for you to start. How much have you actually been able to get onto campus in the last year?
It was quite difficult. So the first 3 months were fantastic until the whole world went into lockdown. Luckily for me, I guess, of the 3 lockdowns that we've had now, is only lockdown 1 that really shut the lab down. So from kind of March up until August time, that was when there was no no research that could be done physically. But since then, the labs have been open and we've been able to be in on a sort of a much lower capacity, but still been able to be in. So I guess kind of going to work has been like it's been kind of a blessing, I guess, that it's been able to get out of the house and get out of the flat and be able to do something and still see some people. But it was actually, to put a kind of positive spin in it, the pandemic also gave me an opportunity, because throughout those months that I was locked down, I was quite fortunate that I was able to learn some computational chemistry as well. So I was able to do some computer predictions on small molecules and do some CSP with the view of using that research that could then be translated into the lab when I go back. So although it was kind of not what I was used to, it actually managed to turn a negative into a slight positive and learn some new skills as well. And also, I guess one of the reasons I joined the RSA was to meet people, because it's been quite difficult to meet people starting a new job but not be able to see people. So to be able to meet different postdocs at the university and other people as well was one of my key motivations for joining the RSA, and it's proved fruitful.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it's highly beneficial, isn't it? You manage to plug yourself into something which has, that a strong people element to it. So yeah, you've definitely done the right thing there. Joan, over to you.
My name's Joan, and I did my undergrad at Imperial a long time ago. So I finished a PhD at the Institute of Cancer Research, also in London. This was back in end of 2013, but I've kind of moved around quite a bit. So I moved to Denmark halfway through my PhD because the lab relocated, even though I'm still part of the ICR back then. And then went to Sweden for a few months for collaboration, and then went to the States, and then now I'm back in the UK. So I've been postdocing basically since the end of 2013. And I'm currently now at the University of Manchester. So I'm in Professor Carl Cadler's lab at the Wellcome Centre for Cell Matrix Research, basically looking at collagen, and I'm interested in the disease side of it. And I'm also a postdoc representative. So we basically, a bit like the RSA, but like not quite a strong association yet, but we're hoping, at least from the School of Biological Sciences, we have a very strong network. So again, we're trying to promote postdocs and try and answer any questions that they might have representation at the high level so that postdoc voices can be heard. And last year, so during lockdown, I kind of initiated the National PostDoc Appreciation Week kind of events, which is going to keep happening hopefully for the foreseeable future. So we're now gearing up for this year's NPOL, as we call it, with the idea of like the MPDC rounding up the week really nicely, because it hopefully will end on a high note and further empowering all the postdocs out there.
Well, we won't hold anything against you for joining Manchester and not Liverpool. Don't worry. That's absolutely fine. How long have you been at Manchester now then?
Oh, 4 years, almost 5 now.
Right.
Looking to get fellowships and, the academia route. I'm still trying, basically.
Claire, last but no means least.
Hi. So I did my PhD, and it was an intercalated one with a master's as well at Manchester. So that was funded by the British Heart Foundation. So I finished that in 2017, and I actually left academia for a spell and did medical writing for 10 months. And then I went back and started my first postdoc August 2018 at Manchester, but in a different lab group, still focused on like cardiac disease and cardiac function. And then in July of 2020, I moved to Liverpool. So I'm now doing something quite different. So I'm looking more generally at like RNA and transcription, and it's in cancer. So it's been quite a different leap, doing something new. So I've been at Liverpool now nearly a year in my second postdoc. So
you came to Liverpool roughly at the same time? Just after Alex then.
Yeah, so I came like peak pandemic.
Yeah.
I got my job. I started my job in July, but I started completely at home, and only actually was able to get back into the lab in November, because as a new starter, because you never had any research set up, he was like the last priority to get back into the lab. So it was quite a strange starting point.
Yeah, I can imagine. And plus, you've not seen that hustle and bustle of the Liverpool campus, have you, at all? You've not experienced it at its peak.
No, it's so, I still think it's really quiet. Like I'm in the lab most days now, but compared to what Manchester was, and probably Joan agrees, it's really busy and the labs are really full. So to then go to a place where labs are empty, and for most of the day, it's been quite a change.
I think you'll be very surprised to see when you come back here, because it's also quite empty right now. That's a bit. I'm actually curious. So what made you decide to leave medical writing, because that's quite an unusual
yeah, so I knew I was thinking of doing a postdoc when I finished my PhD, but I didn't want to do it in the same lab. Like I really enjoyed my PhD, and I still think my PhD supervisor is like one of my mentors as well now, but I did want to do something a bit different. And there was just nothing that I really stood out for me, and I think I just needed that time away to decide, is this what I really want to do? And I did really enjoy medical writing, but I just didn't find it as interesting as lab work is. I think it's a really difficult bug to get rid of when you start doing like wet lab work and doing research. So I thought like an opportunity came up in like a lab which I'd worked alongside. So I thought I'd just go for it, because something like medical writing, it's always there if I ever wanted to go back.
So I guess today's discussion is all themed about kind of building stronger connections. It's interesting that you just said that, Claire. So you said that you worked in, your PhD was at Manchester, and then you went away and then came back to a different lab group that you'd already worked with previously. I guess what kind of connections, or how did that connection come to be? So did you do some work during your PhD with that lab group? I guess, how do you forge that connection?
So actually I didn't really do any direct work with them, but they were a similar field. And basically in the department I worked in, you do get a chance to know a lot of people. And I think towards like my last year of my PhD, like I had spoke to one of the like senior postdocs in the lab saying like, oh, this is like your area of research is something I'm really interested in, and like it would be something I'd want to do in the future. And then I think from just being open with them conversations, they actually emailed me when the postdoc was advertised, which I thought was great, because it was like 10 months later since I'd left. And they said like, we've got this postdoc up and we'd like you to apply for it. So I think, this podcast is on about stronger connections, and I think just having quite open conversations with people, like quite human conversations. It doesn't have to be so formal, and I think people tend to remember you from having them types of chats.
I have to agree, actually, because when I was in the States, my lab relocated. I couldn't go with them, and so I was looking for either new postdoc or staying at UNC Chapel Hill. And it was actually a former postdoc in my PhD lab that sent me an email saying, Carl is looking for a postdoc. He's a great guy. You should definitely apply. And that's how I actually went for it, which, you know, in hindsight does swing about. And like, it's interesting how you go full circle, essentially. Because I have to say, I never thought I was going to live in Manchester. And I love it now.
That's cool. I guess coming to you, Annette, you obviously have now, I guess, been out of kind of lab-based academic roles for a while. How did you translate into your EPSRC job from academia? Did you make new connections with that role, or did you kind of use your old connections to get into that position? Or
no, so going to work for what is essentially a part of government, they call it a non-departmental public body, and now a part of UKRI, of course. It's a very open recruitment process, and now for people who are interested in making that kind of switch, there are opportunities all the time to join UKRI, and in fact the way that EPSRC works still is that you tend to work with a research community that you're not part of, and that's part of being impartial, part of not kind of bringing your own views into funding decisions and peer review or any biases or anything like that. So So essentially, although I did have a fairly small network, as I guess you can imagine, you know, as a postdoc, you quite rapidly move into, so I went in from a materials science background to looking after physical chemistry. And actually one of my first trips out to universities was to a catalysis conference at Liverpool. So that was one of my first outings as you know, with EPSRC, was to do that. And really working for a fund, I always say, is like, it's not really about research. It's about working with people. It's a people job much more than a research job, because what you're doing all the time is getting to know who does what, who gets on with who's got the emerging ideas, where are they, you know, who else is doing that kind of stuff in the UK and around the world. And so over a period of 20 years, so I started off in chemistry, I then worked in water engineering. I've looked after the whole of maths, the whole of engineering, the whole of complexity science, healthcare technologies, and I've also done sort of very project-based work, and during part of my time, I also helped save the on-site nursery from being closed. So I became the joint chair of the nursery management committee, and that involved me working with lots of colleagues from what then were quite disparate research councils. So much as you have like a university with people in different departments, like not necessarily talking to each other, you've got like Polaris House, and, you know, rewind sort of 10 or 15 years, there used to be less kind of cross-working than there is now. And so having the opportunity to kind of work on the nursery management committee with people like from Science and Technologies Facilities Council, EPSRC, MRes, you know, all of us were kind of working together around something important to us, which was keeping the nursery open, but gave me kind of connections in other research councils, which then over the years built on in different roles. So yeah, it's all a good learning experience.
Okay, cool. And I guess a question for Joan as well, that I'm quite intrigued by sort of your bio that you gave at the start. You've obviously been a postdoc for a few years now, but during lockdown you decided to get into the I guess the more kind of career development side of postdoctoral research, which sometimes is often ignored. How was that when you started being involved in that? How was that perceived, and kind of how did you forge those connections? Because these aren't kind of traditional research connections where you talk about your research. This is trying to aid career development and things. So how do you get into that? And yeah, and how have you met people as a result of that?
So I have to say, I was involved with like career development stuff like within Manchester since being a postdoc representative, which is like back in 2017. One of the key reasons why like I wanted to make it a bigger one, especially like something that encompasses the whole UK, is because like during lockdown, I know that at least within Manchester, there's a lot of things that have been cancelled. And so like there are a lot of funding and like uncertainties. And, you know, we do have a very good track record of helping or having these kind of training. Post Appreciation Week started in 2019 by Ian Hassan. And so so in my mind, I guess, like if an institution as big as Manchester is having issues with like funding these sort of things, then it must mean that other universities are going through the same thing. And so I basically emailed our card, so the career development people, and then asked them like, you know, who are the people that we could put out, you know, to get in touch with, and so we can have something that's more of a national thing. And so we sent out an email. So I think, Annette, you would know her, Rachel sent out an email to the N8 partnership, as well as all of the London people who actually organized the last MPDC. And then basically I just waited for people to email me back. And that's how it got started. And well, the rest is history, I guess. And now we have like a group of core people who are very much involved. So basically just email, cold calling.
There's nothing wrong with the cold call. You know, if you're trying to get traction with people, you know, that there's very limited ways, especially at the moment, of engaging with people, isn't there? One thing you've just said there around the people element, it sort of mirrors what Annette was saying. And I guess, Annette, this is a big thing about your role, is about building relationships, strong relationships with many different people and stakeholders. So have you got any tips on that? bearing in mind, I'm guessing it's a big part of your role at the moment around motivating people to foster better connections?
Yeah, so I guess my sort of top tips on that are, first of all, it really helps if there's a purpose for the connection or the collaboration, which everyone can agree on. So in the case of National Postdoc Awareness Week, NA already had started to do some work on postdoc careers. And so joining in with the campaign on National Postdoc Awareness Week was just like a really good opportunity. We hadn't thought of it, but we were really keen to get alongside it and make it a success. And so our comms agency picked it up and ran with the Thank You Postdocs campaign for the N8. But so that's my first tip, that have a problem that everybody agrees is a problem, even if you agree it's a problem for different reasons, or you've got different ideas about how to solve it or how to tackle it. That would be kind of my number one thing about kind of motivating people. And my second thing is, and I got this from a guy called Adam Kahane, who wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, which I really like. I should add it to the reading list, actually. But he talks about having a low barrier to entry and a high ceiling. And I think sometimes making connections can seem really daunting, and motivating people to join in with things can seem really daunting, because there's often an opportunity cost that goes alongside giving up your kind of day job to do something a bit different. And so if you can make it really easy to start those kinds of conversations and relationships, which is essentially what you're doing, then it means that people are more likely to take that risk and take that first step into kind of having a professional collaborative relationship with you. And then you can build it, and not sort of limit yourselves on how high you can go at the outset, but not to put too much pressure on what is essentially like a baby relationship to start off with, and just see, keep it light. So some places I know have like blind date coffees, or blind date lunches, where kind of people, in pre-COVID times, maybe 4 people would get together for lunch, and from different disciplines or different departments, that you can do it really easily over Zoom, and then you can just go, well, that was nice, and I met some different people. But you never know when those kind of connections will be useful to you, or you might find that someone you can help them out with something that already. And I find that thinking of going into those situations and not thinking about what can I take, but how can I help the people that I'm meeting, and using my network to help other people, is a really good way of building the relationships. And then you often find that later on, if you need something, you can then kind of go and ask for advice or help, and people are willing to help you because they know that you're just not out for the take of what's in it for you. There would be some top tips.
No, I really like those. Thanks, Annette. That second one, I mean, the thought of meeting people on a blind date style, face-to-face, terrifies me, to be honest with you. But I can imagine that's easier on Zoom. And I would imagine that is easier on Zoom or Teams and things like that. So that must be beneficial, particularly in the present time. So I suppose that comes back to Claire, because you've started, haven't you, in the middle of the pandemic, and you've probably had to build up some of these relationships online. Have you found some more challenges to that, considering what it would be like face to face?
Yeah, I think one of the main challenges being a postdoc is, especially because my last postdoc, I knew a lot of people because I did my PhD there. And when I joined Liverpool, I realised, okay, I've got a 2-year contract. I need to meet as many people as quick as possible and get them to know me. So if I'm not fortunate to get a grant at the end of the 2 years, people know who I am. And if they have grants, they might ask me to apply for them. And it was when I started in July, I think the first few months was really difficult. because I only met my supervisor over Zoom, and I really didn't know anyone who worked at Liverpool. So there was a couple of things I did. So I joined the RSA, and I'm now a co-chair of the RSA. So I think joining some sort of like organisation or even like a group of postdocs is really useful. So I got to know just how Liverpool works, who the more senior management people are, who are like the lower management people you can go to and speak directly, which I think you need to get to grips with at a university quite quickly. And then from there, I volunteered to sit on some like committees. So I sit on like one of the Concordat committees. So I get to know like the head of our school. And ironically, I met him over Zoom, but his office was opposite my temporary office when I joined. So like a few months after I got back, like he came and knocked on and said hi. And he knew who I was, and he remembered me from the Zoom meetings and things like that. So it kind of shows that you can build some like strong connections virtually. But yeah, like I do think it is difficult, and I think especially it's difficult for postdocs. And I think Joan will agree, if you are moving around postdocs and moving around cities and places, you kind of need to get to know people quick.
And I want to say it's also very different for postdocs compared to PhDs, because PhDs, at least there is like a whole bunch of them starting at the same time and you can hang out. But then on postdocs, you have different age and different priorities. So it's quite interesting to see how that dynamic plans out. So when I moved back to Manchester, and then there's also the culture thing, but when I moved back to Manchester, the other two postdocs, they all have like family. And so for about maybe a year, I feel like the mother duck that takes like the master student go to the pub night, because I'm the oldest one, and then I'm hanging out with these like 20-odd-year-olds, but then I still had a great time because like they are we're all adults, and we're like we have the same conversation topics, and but yeah, it is an odd thing to be a postdoc, I think, because a contract just ends like really and starts at very, very different times. And actually, we also had a postdoc, that started in July, moved down from Glasgow to Manchester. And we kind of adopted her into our lab because there wasn't a lot of like meetings going on, but there was definitely very different. I also kind of included her into our bubble because she lives right nearby, just to add that more personal touch, because I don't know whether you found that as well, Claire, because when you move to a new city, by yourself especially, it's really difficult to not find someone to like wanting that hug, like kind of human interaction.
Yeah, so I'm quite lucky because I live in between Manchester and Liverpool, so I've not actually had to physically move like into a new city. But what I have found difficult is just because at Manchester, like some of my best friends are postdocs there, and we've done our PhD together, or I've met them during my postdoc, and not having that coffee break a day to just speak about things which have gone wrong, things which have gone right. And I am really fortunate that like I still speak. I think one of my best networks is the network of postdocs I've met, and none of them are at Liverpool at the moment, but I still probably message them at least a couple of times a week, even about lab things like, oh, do you remember how we did this last time, or things like that. And I think that is one of going to be your strongest networks, is people like you who you can like really rely on. But it has been difficult starting and not being able to really interact with postdocs within the lab. Like in my lab at the moment, there's literally me and a PhD student, and similar to what Joan was saying, like he has a family and he's a bit older than me, and it's difficult to like, you want to like force a bond with someone, so it has been difficult trying to find like new close friends in a new university.
I think the common experience thing is very important, definitely, and it's almost like a bonding experience, and it really helps. Even if they're undergrad, right? For example, undergrad, like I will have people who are new from my like time in London, and then they've gone into very different directions. But because we had that connection back then, it's still a lot easier to fall back into conversation, because you can always refer back to, like, do you remember that time that we did this in, you know, Hyde Park or something like that. And in a way, like, creating connection, especially in postdoc, because we're all going through a lot of like difficult issues, and that almost is a really easy way to form a very strong connection with one another, because we all have a similar experience, for sure.
Yeah, and I think you definitely need to have friends who are postdocs if you're a postdoc, because people just won't understand. Like, if you are writing a grant and you're stressing about costing it and you don't know how much, I don't know, a cage of mice costs, and it's been stressing you out and you're trying to get that cost, like stupid random things which no one else understands unless you've been through that situation. So I have like so many WhatsApp messages that I just send every week to like postdocs from like around the country. And like I think already, even though it's been like a very virtual year in 2020, in reality, I think if you're a postdoc or a researcher, you've been doing this for years. You've been having to communicate with people over Skype or through emails or messages, because most of the time your network isn't at the university you are in. It's like, it could be across the globe, really. So I think in a situation like academia, maybe going to like a virtual world for 2020 wasn't as big as a jump compared to people who are in offices and they only know the people in that office, because I think in reality we've been doing this for years now.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there, Claire. I think postdocs are one of the very like few jobs, if not the only job in the world, where you are constantly moving around the country on a yearly basis, always looking for that next contract and things like that. Which I guess will probably be a topic of a podcast all by itself. But is a very interesting job that you are constantly having to forge new connections every time you go to a new institution or a new area, or even just a conference as well. So I think postdocs are very well versed in being able to meet people and make connections very, very quickly. I guess you're testament to that, Joan, because you've been all over the world in your stint as a postdoc. How, from that experience, how did you find make a connection with someone in Hong Kong compared to making a connection with someone in the UK? Is there a cultural difference there, or do you find that having a common interest in science or one topic is helpful to that?
You don't need to be a science topic. Like, so when I went back to Hong Kong for exchange, this is like end of 2019, so it's actually quite turbulent times in Hong Kong. The people that bonded, obviously there's a lab people that we bonded, but then the thing that really bonded us is like mutual love of whiskey. And then it's the same with like when I went to the US. It's like not necessarily the science, but rather what is outside of science that really forms it, because again, you have some topic to talk about. The cultural difference, I mean, I guess I don't really see it as much because I grew up in Hong Kong, moved to the UK for my basically my schooling. The biggest cultural difference, I guess, for me, surprisingly, was US and UK. Because in the US, everyone's driving. If you don't have a car, you just have to rely on other people to drive you around. And they also have, even though we speak the same language, they have a very different mindset. So even Denmark is more similar, in my experience anyway. But then when I was in Denmark, I was also hanging out with a lot of the expats. So, you know, I have Danish friends, but a lot of them are also Italian and Taiwanese. And, you know, it's a big international bunch. And I think, again, for those, you know, you don't even need to like whiskey, because it's just like, we're all in a foreign country. Let's like just, you know, have a group chat or, you know, have dinner together so that we can all find out what each other's like. So yeah, so that was my experience.
Okay. And I guess Annette, coming to you, you obviously transitioned out of academia into a less lab-based role. Did you find that the people working in those, was it like going into a different world, or is the mindset different in that kind of job, or was actually quite a lot of similarities and it wasn't that big a transition as you maybe expected?
Well, so I think one of the things that you notice right away when you join a organization which is not as I mean, when you're a postdoc, you're in a team which is essentially made up of PhD students, postdocs, and really bright academics. And when you go to work in an organisation like the research councils, or if I think about the nursery that I was helping to run, you're meeting people and mixing with people from a much more diverse range of educational backgrounds. I'm not going to say in terms of kind of ethnicity backgrounds, because that was different again. The university was more of a diverse in that respect, but certainly in terms of kind of socioeconomic and educational level, that was really different. And so I think there are benefits to kind of getting that sort of perspective from how other people are living. So when Joan was talking about sort of like people in the group having families, well, in the research councils, you'd be working with people, who had been working for the research councils. Well, I mean, I was there for 20 years, but when I joined, people who'd been there and were on the verge of retiring and had, so you've got the kind of age diversity, and all of those things, I think, make for a vibrant working environment where you learn about other people's perspectives and points of view. And the other thing I would say is, being outside of academia and then going into, from material science to an area of research which I knew nothing about, and then in other roles, you get to see very quickly the different cultures between different disciplines in the research base. And that, talking about different cultures is very tangible, and you really get to see that a kind of helicopter view when you're working for a funder.
I have to say, it's funny because when I first arrived in Manchester, in addition to the master's student, I was also friends with the astrophysicists. Again, this is going back to when I was an undergrad. I did fencing, and so the fencing club, there was a guy that I was friends with. He was doing a PhD, he was leaving, but then he basically shoved all his content that was to my side. I was like, here, I know that they will like you, just hang out with them. And so, yeah, and again, yes, there was a diversity. It's a very different field, even within the sciences. And one thing I have noticed as being a postdoc representative is that we can have very different priorities. And so it all boils down to what you prioritize in life. And it kind of doesn't matter where you're from or your economic background or your education background. It's just, what you value the most, and realizing that people don't necessarily have the same views as you do is really important. And this is even more so as a representative, because you need to make sure that you're not putting your own kind of twisted views on their experience, but rather you're actually taking their experience and respecting it and say, okay, we need to see how we can then not so much compromise, but work out what is the best for everyone in the situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Joan, about values. I think understanding your own values and thinking about the values of others and the perspectives of others, so important for kind of this stronger connections piece.
So this podcast is the Developing Practice podcast. So we always like to finish the podcast in the same way, where our guests give us 3 or 4 take-home tips that we could reflect on in terms of our own personal practice. So we've got a few of you here today. So if you could each give us maybe 1 or 2 tips for us to think about, what would they be?
Okay. So I'll just go with 2, I think. The first one is about keeping a beginner's mind and a growth mindset. So I think there's various reasons for this. Being a lifelong learner, trying new things, being the newbie at something, making mistakes. It's really good for you, and it's good for your mental well-being. It's good for your curiosity, your creativity. It's good for your well-being, and it can give you new ideas for your research, which nobody might have thought of before. And there's so many ways you can do that now. You can read, you can listen to podcasts, you can watch YouTube, you can get out for your daily walk if you're, locked down in nature, just keep doing things like that, and learning new things would be one of my top tips. And the other one would be there's a kind of a motto that I've picked up, which is around the quality of your life and the quality of research being related to the quality of your questions, and the kind of motto of no stupid questions being really important, but also as a listener asking open and reflective questions and not trying to score points. You sometimes see that this is more of a comment than a question. Not doing that, and but asking clarifying questions if you don't understand, asking clarifying questions, and just really kind of being genuinely open and curious and listening to what people are saying.
I basically echo what Annette just said, because I think anytime you think that you know enough, you are in danger of being, if you think you know everything, then you are in a really bad place, I think, personally speaking, because you can always learn from something from someone, regardless of where they're from, their experience, their kind of outlook on life, and that's the first step to really communication, just actually going in and say, what can I learn from this person? I guess the other thing is like to really listen. Again, I guess like that's something that Annette has mentioned. There must be a reason why these are top tips anyway. So going in, listening, and actually when you're listening, you're not trying to think of something to either concur with the person or like rebut the person, but rather just listen and then take a moment. And I think one of the techniques I've heard, I don't know whether I really do implement this or not, but is to repeat what the other person said in the sentence and then go, is that what you mean? Just to clarify it in my mind. And then if they say yes, then you know that at least you've got the gist of it, the essence of it down. And then that's when you can go, okay, can I take a moment, let me think about this, and then I can respond. Obviously this doesn't happen, this can't happen in like high kind of intensity situations like interviews, but in general, like, that's a good thing that I try and tend to do when I'm communicating with someone. And if someone then sends back a response, if I'm really upset by the response, I don't respond to that. I will go away, because usually the first response is very defensive and it's more of a protective mechanism rather than what is really the real message behind that response. And so like that's where I would tend to step away, think for a bit and then come back, reread the message and go, okay, actually in a less emotional heightened way, this can have a very different meaning. So I think that's kind of easier, like, and so even if the other person is actually really difficult, when you respond to their difficulty, like in air quotes, they are then usually, in my experience, they're surprised at how well you've taken it. And then they in turn would then be more receptive of what you're trying to tell them. And so, so take time, carefully respond to whatever you need to respond to, and think about, what people are actually saying. Those are like the key things, I think.
So I think, I don't know, I agree with both what Annette and Joan said. So just to like add on would be, I'm definitely someone who probably speaks to everyone I see. So I'm someone who says morning to everyone I pass, coming into work, and then I speak to most people in work. And I think that's something I would definitely say for building strong connections, is just speak to people, say hi. I think get people to know who you are, even if it's just recognize your face. And it just makes it so much easier when you need to contact people. I think in academia, you're constantly having to ask people for maybe something small, something bigger. And if they know who you are already, it makes life so much easier. And I think if you are starting off somewhere new, try to say yes to as many things as possible in that first 6 months. I think once you start getting these opportunities to join committees or be involved in meetings or be involved in organising, then you can say no. And I think it's perfectly acceptable to say, actually, I've got a lot on at the moment, I can't take this on. But put yourself out there so you have them opportunities to say no, because ultimately these short contracts go by so quick. And I think it's just a shame if you got to the end of your contract and be like, well, I really wish I'd have try to get involved in more like management things or organising events. So really go for it in the first 6 months, because honestly, everyone understands how busy it can get as a postdoc. So no one's going to begrudge you for saying down the line, if actually I thought about it, I can't take it on. Everyone understands that as a reason why. So don't be scared to just say yeah to get more information.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. And Alex, you've done such a great job co-hosting today. It'd be rude for me not to come to you as well.
Well, say yes anytime anyone asks you to host a podcast is the best tip. I think something that I kind of learned quite recently, and something I never really considered through my PhD, is to have kind of some self-worth and value yourself. As a really kind of silly example, I look back now, me and my friends laugh at this. When I got offered my postdoc, it would have been very convenient for me to start in January, but they asked me if I could start in December. And I said yes, immediately thinking if I'd said no to this person, I was not going to get this position. And because why would they even offer me it anyway? So I need to tie myself down to as fast as possible. So I was going to commute from Sheffield to Liverpool every day, which is like a 2-hour car drive without any rush hour traffic. And I was going to do that every day and be exhausted for a month. And then me and my friends are like, why are you doing this? If you just say it's easy to start in January, it'll be a lot easier. And I did. And they said, yeah, of course you can start in January. Don't be ridiculous. It's going to be much easier for you to move and find that. And I think ever since then, you think you have to have some self-value and self-worth. I think if you kind of believe in yourself a little bit and say, oh, hold on, I'm here for a reason. Someone's giving me this position because I've earned it and I add value to this project. I think you go a long way. And I think you can, when you kind of realize that, you start to become a lot more confident in yourself. And then it becomes a lot easier to build connections, because you see where you are on merit and you start talking to someone as a peer and not as the fact that you're below them. And once you can have that conversation on that same level, I think it becomes a lot easier to forge connections when you realize that you have something to give as well as learning from the other person.
Brilliant. Well, it's been great to have a chat with you all, and thanks very much for coming along.